Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're taking a look at the Trump administration's shakeup of the federal workforce. And we've got some pretty interesting sources here that paint a pretty wild picture of what's going on, especially the Bureau of Prisons.
The BOP.
Yeah, the BOP, exactly. For those who might not know, the BOP is responsible for managing all the federal prisons across the country. They've got a huge population of inmates to deal with a massive staff and a whole lot of security concerns.
It's a big operation, over 150,000 inmates, a whole network of facilities.
Exactly. And our sources show that they've been dealing with some serious challenges for a while now. We're talking about chronic understaffing, outdated infrastructure, high turnover.
The list goes on.
Yeah, it really does. One report we saw actually highlighted that a single officer is sometimes responsible for overseeing like over 100 inmates at once. I mean, can you imagine that? That's just a recipe for disaster. And on top of all that, the BOP's budget has actually been increasing, even though the prison population has been going down.
Yeah, that might seem a little counterintuitive, but it really reflects the rising costs of just running these facilities. Healthcare for aging inmates, security upgrades, maintaining those outdated buildings, it all adds up.
So we've got this agency that's already stretched super thin, and then the Trump administration throws this curveball, this program called deferred resignation.
This is where things get really interesting. They're essentially offering employees 8 months of pay to quit.
Yeah, it's like, here's a golden parachute, please just leave. But it raises so many questions. Like, first of all, is it even legal? The government's only funded through mid-March, so how can they promise 8 months of pay? There's this thing called the Anti-Deficiency Act, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
It basically prevents the government from spending money it doesn't have.
Right. You've hit the nail on the head there. The Anti-Deficiency Act is a cornerstone of fiscal responsibility in government. It's designed to prevent agencies from racking up debts that they can't pay. So offering 8 months of pay when funding is uncertain definitely raises some red flags.
Yeah, some GOP officials are even saying the program is outright illegal. Meanwhile, the Office of Personnel Management...
OPM.
Yeah, OPM, thank you. OPM, which is running this whole thing, insists it's perfectly fine.
It's a confusing situation.
For sure. And in the middle of all of this, you've got thousands of BOP employees trying to figure out what to do. If they take the offer, they get a nice payout, but they're also walking away from a job, maybe even a career. If they stay, they risk facing potential furloughs, which means unpaid leave, if the government does shut down. And there are even rumors about reclassifying some positions to at-will status.
That's a big one. At-will status means employees could be fired for any reason. Without the usual protections that federal workers have, it's a huge shift that could really change the nature of federal employment.
Okay, so we've got this deferred resignation program causing all kinds of uncertainty. But let's not forget, the BOP was already dealing with a whole bunch of problems. Before this offer was even on the table, they desperately need more staff. But this program could lead to a mass exodus of experienced employees, which would make the understaffing even worse.
And that's a critical situation. Imagine the impact on safety and security within the prisons if they lose a significant portion of their workforce. We could be talking about jeopardizing the well-being of both inmates and staff.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. And then just to add another layer of complexity, the BOP is also being tasked with new responsibilities related to immigration enforcement.
That's right. They're now being asked to help with the apprehension and detention of undocumented individuals, which adds a whole new dimension to their already very demanding workload.
It's like they're being asked to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle on a tightrope.
I think that's a pretty accurate analogy. It really highlights the incredible pressure that the BOP is under right now.
And then to make matters even more confusing, just yesterday, the BOP website went down. And along with it, all of their policies. There's speculation that this is tied to a recent executive order, targeting what the administration is calling gender ideology extremism.
The removal of these policies, especially those concerning the treatment of transgender inmates, it's created a lot of anxiety and confusion. It's unclear what this means for those individuals or for the staff who are responsible for their care.
So what does all of this mean? We've got a controversial deferred resignation program that could be illegal, a pre-existing staffing crisis at the BOP, new immigration duties being piled on, and a website blackout that's fueling even more uncertainty. It's like a perfect storm brewing.
And we're just getting started. Let's unpack how this all fits into the bigger picture of the Trump administration's strategy for the federal workforce.
After a quick break, we'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the potential impacts of these changes. Stay with us. So before the break, we were talking about all the crazy stuff happening at the Bureau of Prisons. Yeah. The BOP. But this isn't just about one agency, is it?
No, not at all. What we're seeing at the BOP is really like a microcosm of what's happening across the whole federal workforce. These changes suggest a much broader strategy, to downsize the government and potentially like reshape its role in society.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the long-term consequences. What happens when you shrink the very institutions that are meant to serve the public? I mean, we're talking about potentially losing decades of expertise and experience.
Right. It's crucial to understand how this connects to the services you rely on every day. Think about Social Security, Medicare, national parks, food safety inspections. All of these things are handled by federal agencies.
And what about air traffic control? I know I personally feel a lot safer knowing there are highly trained professionals making sure planes don't collide. Remember that near miss a few years back over Chicago?
Oh, yeah.
That was way too close for comfort.
Yeah. Absolutely. These are complex systems that need skilled people to function properly. If you start cutting jobs without a clear plan, you're going to see delays, backlogs, and potentially even dangerous situations.
And it's not just about the immediate impact either. It also sends a message to future generations. If the government gets a reputation for treating its employees poorly, who's going to want to work there?
It's a valid concern. We could see a brain drain where the most talented individuals opt for the private sector, leaving the government struggling to attract qualified candidates. And that could lead to a decline in the quality of services provided to everyone.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect with all these potentially far-reaching consequences. And speaking of consequences, we can't forget about the lawsuit filed by the American Federation of Government Employees.
The AFGE.
Right, the AFGE. They represent a lot of federal workers. And they're arguing that this deferred resignation program is not only illegal, but also a deliberate attempt to politicize the civil service.
It's a big deal.
They're basically saying it's creating a toxic work environment, pushing people out through intimidation and fear.
And they're worried that the Trump administration is trying to dismantle the merit-based system. That's long been like a hallmark of the civil service. This system is designed to ensure that federal employees are hired and promoted based on their qualifications, not their political affiliations.
So it's a lot to keep track of. We've got this program causing a stir, legal challenges, the possibility of a government shutdown looming, and tons of anxious employees wondering what their future holds.
It's definitely complex.
Yeah.
So to help you visualize the timeline of events, let's break it down step by step.
Yeah, walk us through it.
So first, we have the ongoing struggles at the BOP, the understaffing budget issues, aging infrastructure. And then back in December, they announced the closure of 7 prisons, which signaled that some major changes were coming.
Right. And then, like right on cue, on January 20th, Trump is inaugurated, and Colette Peters, the director of the BOP, resigns. It was like she saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah. And her departure created a leadership vacuum. William Lathrop stepped in as acting director. But before he could even get settled, the BOP got hit with those new immigration enforcement responsibilities.
Oh, man. That's like one thing after another. And then just a week later, the deferred resignation offer landed in inboxes across the federal government.
And with that came this wave of confusion and legal challenges. The AFGE filed their lawsuit, OPM had to clarify the details of the program, and even some GOP officials started voicing concerns about its legality.
And then fast forward to February 2nd, just yesterday, the BOP website went dark, taking all those crucial policy documents with it.
And then today, February 3rd, OPM sent out another email titled Fork in the Road, trying to reassure employees that they would be paid even if a shutdown happens.
But it didn't exactly inspire confidence, did it? It felt more like a desperate attempt to paper over the cracks.
Yeah.
And all this is happening with the deadline to accept the deferred resignation offer just 3 days away on February 6th.
Right after the deadline, there's a brief transition period where employees who are leaving are expected to prepare for their departure.
And then on March 1st, those who accepted the offer are officially placed on administrative leave, which is basically paid time off until September 30th. But of course, this all depends on whether Congress can avoid a government shutdown on March 14th.
It's a precarious situation with a lot of unknowns. So with all of this in mind, let's shift our focus to you, the listener.
Yeah, this all sounds pretty chaotic. But how does it actually impact people's lives?
That's the key question, isn't it? We need to understand what this means for the average person who relies on the services that the federal government provides.
So let's dive into that. We'll explore the potential consequences of these changes and what they could mean for you and your community. All right, so we're back. And before the break, we were talking about that really complex timeline. But now we need to, figure out what it all means for you, the listener.
Yeah, it's about connecting the dots. Think about the federal agencies that you interact with on a regular basis. Do you rely on Social Security benefits? Right.
Do you file taxes every year? Have you traveled by air recently?
Or maybe you're a farmer who depends on USDA inspections, or a small business owner who needs an SBA loan.
Exactly. Those are just a few examples of how, deeply intertwined our lives are with the functions of the federal government. If these agencies are weakened by staff shortages or a loss of expertise, it could have a ripple effect on all those essential services.
We could see longer wait times for benefits delays and tax refunds, more foodborne illnesses, maybe even a decrease in air travel safety.
Right, and those are just the immediate impacts. In the long term, this could have a significant effect on the government's ability to, attract and retain talent. If working for the government becomes less appealing, it could lead to a decline in the quality of services across the board.
It's a worrying thought. I mean, are we saying that serving the public is less valuable than pursuing a career in the private sector?
Well, that's the conversation we need to be having.
Yeah.
What kind of message does this send to young people who might be considering a career in public service? Yeah, it feels like we're in a bit of a downward spiral. If talented people are discouraged from working for the government, the quality of services could decline, leading to even more disillusionment and making those jobs even less attractive. So how do we break that cycle?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. We need to stay informed about these developments, ask critical questions, and, hold our elected officials accountable. We can also support organizations like the AFGE that are fighting to protect the rights of federal workers.
And beyond that, I think we need to talk about these issues. Have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations with our friends, families, and colleagues about the value of public service. What kind of society do we want to live in? One where the common good is prioritized, or one where individual gain takes precedence?
Those are really important questions, and ultimately the answers are going to shape the future of public service in this country.
We've covered a lot of ground today. This is a complicated issue, but this is just a starting point. We really encourage you to keep digging, do your own research, and stay engaged with these issues.
There's always more to learn. And it's up to all of us to be informed and active participants in shaping the future we want to see.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Trump administration's federal workforce changes. It's a story that's still unfolding, and we'll be sure to keep you updated as it develops. Until next time, stay curious,